suck his finger in the end of your what?
Howdy, everyone. Pull up a chair, kick up your boots, and have a nice sip on a
Sarsaparilla.
What?
Well, I would write it down, but I don't figure you could read it. Sody pop.
It's Support Your Local Podcast, the show that goes over the 1969 Western comedy classic, Support Your Local Sheriff, one chapter at a time. My name is Robert Smith. I'm your host. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to go over Chapter 5, Mayor's Daughter. Where we left off in Chapter 4, we had a brand new sheriff getting his badge and getting sworn in. We had a jail with no bars, and we had a town getting their monthly bath. What can we expect today? Well, let's find out. But before we do that, I do want to take a moment and kind of give you a chance to set the scene. Let's get a feel for what the movie was getting into, both in the time frame that it's set and the time frame that it was being released to. This is a segment that I like to call It Came in '69.
That gun had gone off and it blown right up in the face.
Now, it wouldn't have done my finger a hell of a lot of good either, would it?
In 1869, in May, the first transcontinental railroad in North America is completed at Promontory, Utah, by the driving of the Golden Spike. On the women's suffrage movement in New York, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton formed the National Women's Suffrage Association. Sainsbury's first store in Drury Lane, London, is opened. Boston University is chartered by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Let's fast forward a little bit to 1969, the year of our movie. Placed in solitary confinement for 17 months, Winnie Mandela is detained under the South Africans Terrorism Act. Canada officially legalizes the use of contraception and the practice of abortion. Then Governor of California, Ronald Reagan, declares martial law on UC Berkeley and the entire city as they try to build planned dorm buildings on People's Park. 3,000 protesters try to seize it back but are waited off by riot police and tear gas. One man was shot and killed. 9 days of fighting cease, and U.S. troops in the 101st Airborne Division and South Vietnamese forces capture Ap Bia Mountain Hill 937. It is known as one of the bloodiest battles of the Vietnam War. Midnight Cowboy is released with an X rating, based on a novel of the same name. During the bed-in at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal, John Lennon and Yoko Ono record Give Peace a Chance. And this has been It Came in '69. So we start our chapter with someone who is very muddy, obviously from our town brawl outside of Ollie Perkins' store, and they're washing their hair with a water pump in the sink. They lift their head up and part their hair kind of like curtains to look out the window, and we see that it is in fact Joan Hackett. And when I see this, I notice that, yes, she's cleaning off after her little romp in the mud, but if you look, she's in her lawn underwear, this red one-piece underwear, and she's muddy everywhere. And I'm curious as to that because even if mud had been slipping into her shirt and things like that, you would think that the mud would not be on her arms and her chest and everywhere else. And not to get too touchy, but her pants were way too tight to get the legs of her underwear muddy. There's no way that it slid down or slid up the legs of her pants. But anyways, she lifts her head up and she parts her hair much like a curtain. And much to her dismay, she sees that the sheriff is heading towards her house, followed by who we now know as her father, Ollie Perkins. She scrambles through the house looking for an escape, and she goes halfway up the stairs, but she then changes her mind and puts herself in a downstairs closet. The mayor and sheriff enter, the mayor calling for Joan Hackett, who we now know as her character name of Prudy, and the mayor would like to introduce the two to each other, describing her cooking skills and looks, attributing them to her departed mother. Jason assumes, as we all would, that the mother has passed on, mortality rate being what it was back then. But the mayor, with a complete deadpan face that only Harry Morgan can pull off, he states, nope, just departed. And this has to be easily one of the top 5 jokes of the movie. It gets me every time. I chuckle. It shows the great script writing, that it's not just Jason that gets all the best jokes. Nowadays that's usually just kind of carved out for the main character. But to have such a side character have some of these great one-liners and this great delivery kind of speaks to the movie as a whole. As the mayor shows the sheriff his organ,
Phrasing.
Prudy sneaks out of the closet.
Phrasing.
And attempts to, again, go up the stairs. And this shows that the ultimate goal for her was to get upstairs, presumably to her room. But she had plenty of time to make it up there earlier when she turned back around. So I'm not entirely sure what her plan is. It's the old joke of, did you make it where you were going? No, I got halfway there, got too tired and came back. Well, that's the same distance. She hears the men coming up to the dining room, and she, of course, doesn't go upstairs. She instead of returning to the closet where she already knew she would have been safe, she runs into the aforementioned dining room. So if somebody's mentioned, oh, let me show you the dining room, and you're trying to escape them, the first place that you run to is probably not going to be the dining room, but alas, sigh. She darts through the door, and we soon find out that it's to the kitchen. And whoop, 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 we have a trope alert. The mayor offers a drink to the sheriff, but instead of the traditional trope of everybody drinking whiskey and nothing but booze in the Old West, the sheriff actually asks the mayor for a glass of water. And a bit taken back by this, a bit surprised, the mayor is not sure what. He's kind of surprised that somebody wouldn't ask for a hard drink, and he takes a moment but then resumes bragging about the house and stating that they actually have a water pump right there in the kitchen, which was apparently a novelty of that time. So indoor plumbing is not something that is readily available in this territory as of yet, and it's just another thing for the mayor to kind of brag about his status and where they are in life. It does seem to genuinely surprise the sheriff that they had indoor plumbing. And for our trope alert, it's, again, everybody in Westerns doing nothing but drinking booze. You never see somebody actually drinking water. And this, unlike some of the other tropes that I've kind of debunked and talked about in the previous episodes, this one actually rings a little bit true. So the reason that a lot of people resorted to drinking beer and hard liquor and alcohol and all that was that water wasn't always a reliable source of drinking in those times, with the advent of diseases, with the dirtiness, the lack of filtration in water sources. It wasn't always safe to just drink water straight from the well or straight from the creek or wherever they're getting their water from. It was assumed to be a lot safer to just drink some booze. In theory, the alcohol would kill whatever it was that was in the water. Prudy, who is now in the kitchen, she darts out the door to the porch, but when she sees that she's now out in public with a bustling crowd about, she tries to stealthily crawl into the bushes, and she appears to look into the window as it cuts to a shot of the mayor and sheriff walking through the house towards the door that she just exited. But however, when we cut back to a wide shot of Prudy, we can see that the curtains are shut in the window and in the door, so there's not really any way that she could have seen what we just saw. It's shot in a way that we're to presume that we're seeing the sheriff and the mayor from Prudy's perspective, but with the blocking of the windows and the layout, that just wouldn't have been, that couldn't have been true. She continues on her quest to put herself exactly where they are going to be rather than away from them by climbing a nearby tree that's just outside that door. And this would be a fine plan, I suppose, except that when you see this tree, as we pan up a little bit as she's climbing, it's not a very big tree, and it only has a couple branches that appear to be right at eye level to anyone walking past it. So all the foliage of it, all the leaves, are higher up. So she's literally sitting on a branch in plain sight of the sheriff and mayor as they're walking out the door. The sheriff and mayor come out on the porch, and the mayor decides it's time to let the sheriff in on the inner workings of the town, specifically in regards to the Danbys. The mayor states that arresting the Danbys is kind of a new idea that would take some getting used to, But after trying to find any loophole he could to what the sheriff supposedly saw Joe Danby do, the mayor finally has to admit and begin to grin when Jason tells him that he's the mayor and he would have to do whatever the mayor tells him to do, which is a perk to Harry Morgan. He's kind of excited to hear that. But that relief of avoiding another potential dead sheriff is very short-lived, because if that's how the mayor runs the town, then Jason doesn't want anything to do with it, and he's willing to turn in his badge. We then get another great example of Harry Morgan's line delivery as he talks out of both sides of his mouth without even a hiccup. He agrees with everything the sheriff says, then he takes it a step back without another breath, and it's just great line delivery. Again, great script writing, but you have to have a good actor like Harry Morgan to pull something off like that. Now that the mayor is assured that the sheriff doesn't expect him to help out with the arrest, he hurries off before the sheriff changes his mind, and to go alert the townsfolk that they will have to be supportive of their new sheriff, hence the title of this movie. The sheriff begins to quickly walk back into town when he stops and notices something peculiar, namely someone who has gotten undressed, poured a bucket of water over her head, and climbed a tree. Prudy. She uses her hair backwards from what we saw earlier to actually close the curtains this time over her eyes, but the embarrassment from the sheriff leads her to begin to scold him. She stops when a passerby walks up, and we find out that this is Mrs. Danvers, played by Kathleen Freeman. And Miss Freeman just happens to be the person we're spotlighting today in a segment I like to call Remember the Name.
That's about all I'm going to do the rest of my life is go around remembering your name.
So we're talking today about Miss Kathleen Freeman. She was born February of 1923. She left us in August of 2001. For a short time in the early 50s, she was a contract player for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM, who is obviously the makers of this movie. She appeared in small and uncredited bit parts, but her first notable early role was a uncredited part in the musical Singing in the Rain. So very famous, obvious musical number in Singing in the Rain. She began with the 1954 film Three Ring Circus. She became a favorite foil of Jerry Lewis, playing opposite him in 11 films. And these are some of his most better-known comedies, including The Disorderly Orderly, The Errand Boy, The Nutty Professor. And even 30 years later, she actually made a brief appearance in Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps, the Eddie Murphy remake of the Jerry Lewis classics. Her other film roles include appearances in The Missouri Traveler, The Fly, Support Your Local Sheriff, Support Your Local Gunfighter, obviously, even as far into the 80s and 90s, where she played Sister Mary Stigmata in John Landis's Blues Brothers 2000, reprising a role that she had played in the original Blues Brothers with Belushi and Aykroyd. She was in Inner Space, Gremlins 2, The New Batch, and as a foul-mouthed apartment building manager in Dragnet. And then she was obviously the what I know her from, and this is where I knew her from, was the gangster mom in Naked Gun 33 1/3, The Final Insult. The not as great as the other two versions, but the still good Leslie Nielsen spoof movie. That's where I first saw her, so I probably knew of her from the Support Your Local movies, but I knew her instantly, seeing her as the person, as the mom of the convict that breaks out with Leslie Nielsen in Naked Gun 33 1/3. But she had also been in a lot of TV roles, including Donna Reed's show, The Lucy Show, Hogan's Heroes, I Dream of Jeannie. This was the fun fact one that I found on IMDb. She played the voice of Peggy Bundy's mom on Married with Children. She'd also been in Mama's Family, Gomer Pyle, Beverly Hillbillies. IMDb lists her at over 300 movies. So she has just been in a little bit of everything throughout her career. As I mentioned earlier, I knew her from Naked Gun 33 1/3, but I have a confession. Even as knowledgeable as I profess to be on actors and movies and characters, I had a bit of mistaken identity with her. So I have always equated her as the grizzled short mom, not to be offensive to Miss Freeman, I apologize, but kind of bulldog faced, so it has the jowls of a bulldog. I equated her as that character as being the same person as the grizzled short mom from the Goonies. And from, I believe, Throw Mama from Your Train, but specifically the Goonies. I always equated as a kid those two people as the same person. That's obviously not the case. In doing IMDb research, I was humbled in finding out that that was not her, but definitely a similar look and vibe of the characters. But I always thought that those were the same too. But she is, in fact, the one from Naked Gun 33 1/3, who is not the one from the Goonies. But a long, illustrious career for Miss Freeman, but she has been the subject of our segment today in Remember the Name.
You tell him I remember his name.
So as we come back, Mrs. Danvers is there to check to make sure that this man isn't bothering Prudy, and I'm interested to know what scenario, given the information that Mrs. Danvers has. So there's a gentleman with a sheriff's badge standing outside the front white picket fence of the mayor, and the mayor's daughter is up in a tree in her underwear, covered in mud, with wet hair, yelling at him. But she thinks that this might be a scenario that the sheriff is the one that's in the wrong, and just trying to figure that part out. The sheriff asks Miss Danvers about Prudy and says, "Do you know this person?" And she states that yes, she's a normal, lovable person, except for the time that she got her hair stuck in the ice cream freezer, and has a nice, hearty laugh, which is what Kathleen Freeman is known for as an actress, is that loud, boisterous voice. And when she gets into a cackle laugh, it is very contagious, very funny. But she seems like the scenario that Prudy's in right now, it just seems like an unlikely, unfortunate event, except that we find out throughout the movie, starting with the ice cream freezer event that Mrs. Danvers alludes to, we just find out that Prudy might just be a bit clumsy. And finally, we end our scene with the sheriff finally leaving Prudy alone, as she requests, and he goes to leave to arrest Joe, and Mrs. Danvers leaves us as we fade off with her boisterous laugh, leaving off, walking down the sidewalk, and Prudy, unfortunately, is still just hanging out in the tree. But we close our chapter with that. What will happen next? Hopefully our sheriff is not in too much danger by going to capture Joe. Hopefully his fate is a little bit better than the previous sheriff's, but we'll find that all out next week when we go to Chapter 6, Arresting Joe Danby. So I wonder what happens in that chapter. That's a very interesting title. It's pretty secretive. I don't know what to expect, but we will find that out next week when we come back for Chapter 6, Arresting Joe Danby. Until then, if you haven't already, please, please, please like and subscribe to us on all of your social media platforms. We have a channel on YouTube, all of which are titled Support Your Local Podcast. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feedback, please, please, please hit us up via email. It's supyourlocalpodcast. That's SUPP, yourlocalpodcast@gmail.com. As always, throw a conversation out there. Get some questions going. I love interacting with the audience. I love having conversations about this movie. If you have not already found it, or if you have never seen this movie, or even if you want to watch it for the millionth time, right now, currently, as this airs, we are seeing the movie free on IMDb, Freevee, which used to be IMDb TV. It's free on YouTube. It's free on Pluto TV. It is out there to see. Go ahead and check that out. Go ahead and check out Support Your Local Gunfighter while you're at it. But until next week, I appreciate you all. I really love doing this. I want to continue doing this for you. Let's make this bigger and better. I thank you for your time, but as always, support your local podcast.
He stuck his finger in the end of your what?
Hello, I'm Robert T. Smith, host of Support Your Local Podcast. I want to take a moment to remind you to hit that fast forward button. That is, unless you want to hear about something good being done. Anyone who knows me knows that I love bowling. In 2016, I founded the Smith Family Bowling Scholarship Foundation, intended to honor my father's hard work and dedication to community service and award scholarships to youth bowlers throughout the nation. To date, we've awarded well over $15,000 in scholarships. If you are a bowler, know a bowler, have ever seen a bowler, or heard about anyone who has ever seen a video of a bowler, I'd love for you to help promote the SFBSF and its mission. Please go to sfbsf.com and see what we're all about. While you're there, please consider hitting that donate button and helping us make a brighter future for our youth. Again, that's sfbsf.com. Thank you for your time.